Despite its somewhat unusual name, the French and Indian War did not involve actual Indians. European nations have had a propensity for regional supremacy for centuries. The two titans of Europe, France and Britain, have upheld this tradition even in foreign lands. The numerous battles and centuries' worth of conflicts caused bad blood to form between the powers, and aggressions began spilling over into colonial North America. By 1756, the British and French had been fighting over imperial interests for 2 years. It caused plenty of tension over the rights to commercial trade, with the governments having a bubbling financial interest in the new land. But it was not just over the coveted trade of goods like beaver pelts. They also fought over alliances with native tribes. Threats flew from both sides, telling the other to back down or face dire consequences. Native tribal leaders promised the British that they could build an outpost in the Ohio Forks region, but the French did not like this encroachment on what they considered their territory. They already held posts in Canada, New York, and Pennsylvania. Ohio was a strategic region for them, as it gave them a straight shot into their Louisiana territories. It would also keep the British contained to the East Coast, making them unable to spread their armies and empire any further west. The French worried that all their colonies would fall if a formidable British presence were allowed to grow on the continent. They were not wrong. But how did it all begin? On a cold morning in early December 1753, Major George Washington arrived at the place where he would deliver an important message from Virginia Governor Robert Dinwiddie. The carried letter demanded that the French remove themselves from these lands, as they were lands that the British declared they had claimed. The French captain demurred and directed him to an outpost 50 miles away. Before setting off the next day, George witnessed the arrival of the Seneca leader, Half-King, in the night. Half-King had a deep hatred for the French. When he was a boy, the French brutally murdered his father and dishonored his corpse afterward. He had brought a similar message as the British: leave the Ohio watersheds. According to him, the natives would have happily traded and lived beside the French settlers in the area had they been as friendly to them as the British had been. Instead, the French had come and taken their land by force. Half-King declared that the natives could not submit to this treatment. They officially called on the French to leave the area. The French captain, Pierre-Paul Marin de la Malgue, referred to the natives as flies or mosquitoes and defiantly told Half-King that the French would continue to build on the river. Half-King did not accompany the British in 1753 to reiterate his message to the other French commanders. Instead, he looked for the support of the local tribes. That night, the major, his men, and 4 French escorts rode out, and after 4 days of riding, the men arrived at Fort Le Boeuf. Major Washington and his men presented Governor Dinwiddie's letter to the fort commander, a rugged Canadian named Jacques Legadeur de Saint-Pierre. It was the first formal confrontation between the British and French during this period. The message that Washington delivered announced to the French that it was a well-known fact that the lands around the Ohio River belonged to Great Britain. As such, Dinwiddie requested that the French leave in a peaceful manner. The French reply was not appealing to the British. They insisted on defending the territory, claiming that the British had no right to use the waters for trading. They claimed that any Brit caught doing so would be arrested. Major George Washington left Fort Le Boeuf with the French reply and reached Williamsburg, Virginia, a month later on January 16, 1754. Governor Dinwiddie was disappointed yet remained resolute. He saw the bigger picture and agreed with Washington that speedy action was paramount to success. The major returned to the Ohio Valley with a contingent of militiamen, including traders familiar with the Native Americans of the region. Upon making the minimum preparations, Lieutenant Colonel George Washington and his men set out for Ohio in mid-April 1754. However, the French had also sent 800 troops toward the unfinished British fort in Ohio and had managed to capture it. Meanwhile, George received a letter from Half-King urging him to come to his aid. The Seneca leader had decided to back the British and convinced the other chiefs that it was the best option. But now it looked like he had chosen poorly. For the sake of his honor, Half-King needed to win against the French. Washington was compelled by the plea for help, although he perhaps did not fully understand that the indigenous leader had a personal agenda: revenge against the French. A victory would also help strengthen his position with his people, proving he had made wise decisions. Even though the task seemed impossible, Washington decided to head there with his men. After strategizing, Washington stationed his company at the British fortified storehouse at Redstone Creek and held out for reinforcements. Hopefully, he would receive more commissioned officers because, up until then, he was sorely lacking those in his militia. He sent Ensign Edward Ward and an escort of natives back with letters to Dinwiddie and messengers to Half King to meet with him to strategize. To add to his troubles, Washington merged his column with a group of militia volunteers raised by Captain William Trent. That would have been good news, except that these hardscrabble traitors were idle, greedy, and unreasonable. On May 24th, while waiting for reinforcements to take back the stolen fort, Washington set up camp in Great Meadows on a place he called a charming field for an encounter. Reconnaissance units had informed him of some French encampments in the area. The British troops quickly overcame the Frenchmen. Half King and his contingent intercepted those trying to run into the woods. After less than 15 minutes of battle, it was over, and the French had surrendered. 13 French lay dead or wounded in the glen, including their commander, Joseph Coulon de Jumonville. The British had suffered only one death. As Jumonville lay on the field, he tried to call for a ceasefire as the battle waged on, but in the heat of the fray, his call went unheeded. Now, as the smoke cleared, he implored Washington to read the letters he clutched in his hands. Upon reading them, Washington quickly realized that he had just committed the gravest error. Jumonville's second-in-command, Drouillon, earnestly backed up Jumonville's last words and the letters he carried. He told Washington that they were emissaries on a diplomatic mission and had been sent to give the British a message. The letters they brought to the British called for their removal from the Ohio Valley. Further inspection of the letters only confirmed what the Frenchmen told them. The French claimed they wanted to keep the peace and were diplomatically demanding that the British leave their lands in the Ohio Valley under threat of forcible ejection. This mission was similar to the one Washington had undertaken the year before. Before the lieutenant colonel could react to the letters, Half King walked up to the injured Jumonville. It was now his moment to enact his revenge for the humiliation at the half-built Ohio Forks outpost. As the Frenchman lay helpless and wounded, Half King allegedly said to him, "Tu n'es pas encore mort, mon père," which translates to, "Thou art not yet dead, my father." He then took his tomahawk and crushed Jumonville's skull, killing him. He allegedly washed his hands in the dead man's brains. Though short, those 15 minutes, later dubbed the Jumonville Affair, were crucial to American colonial history. In those 15 minutes, a young 22-year-old Lieutenant Colonel George Washington had started the French and Indian War. He would not yet understand the consequences that had been set in motion. When Washington wrote to Dinwiddie, he took pains to ensure he accused the French of being the instigators, claiming it was suspicious that a supposed French ambassadorial detail would be hiding and camping in a skulking place deep in the glen. If the French knew where the British were, why had they not delivered the message already? However, all the prisoners unanimously denied the claims of the British. They continued to persist in their claims of being an embassy. Unmoved, Washington sent the French prisoners to Dinwiddie and Williamsburg. He warned the governor not to be swayed by their many smooth stories, adding that they ought to be hanged as spies of the worst sort. Dinwiddie did not buy Washington's defense of his actions or claims that the French started the affair. He knew he would have to do some damage control. In his eyes, Washington had opened fire on a camp of sleeping Frenchmen while both sides were officially at peace. With political suaveness, Dinwiddie told his London superiors that Half King and his men started the conflict, and that Washington and his men had just backed them up. When the French at the newly erected Fort Duquesne heard of the essentially unprovoked attack in the glen, retribution was sure to follow. From the end of May to the beginning of June, the 150 men of Great Meadows tirelessly worked to build a circular fort, naming it Fort Necessity. While the British were building the fort, Half King went on a diplomatic mission. He carried the scalps taken from several French heads as he made his way to make a bid to persuade the Seneca, Delaware, and Shawnee warriors to join him and the British in the fight against the French. Half King showed up with about 80 Native Americans as soon as the fort was finished, but there was not one warrior in the group. Over the next few weeks, Army regulars from South Carolina made it to the fort, along with 9 small swivel cannons. The lazy construction and embarrassing state of the fort gave them pause. On June 18th, Washington had a highly disappointing meeting with Half King and the Six Nations Council at Onondaga. Not only were they reluctant to join the fight against the French, but Half King himself was also beginning to waver on the decision. Ultimately, Washington's diplomatic prowess proved ineffective with the native chiefs. The council decided that the Six Nations would remain neutral in the white man's fight. Washington's actions alone during the Jumonville affair would not have likely triggered an all-out war, insulting as the French may have found it. But the savage butchery of Jumonville was more than the French could let slide. When the French reached Fort Necessity, the British could not handle the onslaught. The French allowed the British forces to surrender the fort, which they did, and saw the British army out with honors. The British baggage left behind to the French was too irresistible of a temptation. Eventually, Washington's journal made it into the hands of Governor Duquesne. Washington's innermost thoughts did nothing to endear him to the French governor, who declared that there is nothing more unworthy and lower, even blacker than the sentiments and way of thinking of this Washington. He then wistfully stated that he wished he could have had the pleasure to read this outrageous journal in front of his very nose. He may have missed that opportunity, but he wanted to ensure every French person knew what a villain Washington was. So he had the journal sent to Paris, where it was published and made available for anyone to read. From here, things kept escalating as the two empires faced each other in multiple clashes. In 1756, Britain officially declared war on France, later termed the 7 Years' War. However, the conflict in North America had already started in 1754. Lasting until 1763, the 7 Years' War would spread across the globe. Though the French and Indian War was fought on North American soil, this new conflict would have far-reaching consequences for many people. It would create new nations and change the course of world history forever. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the French and Indian War, check out our book, The French and Indian War, a captivating guide to the North American conflict between Great Britain and France, along with its impact on the history of Canada, the US, and the 7 Years' War. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.